Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, 3 lines from the top at the 2 dots. Sfina is Kshura. So the Mishnah said that if you have ships that are tied together, you can be metaltel, you can carry from one to the other. But if they're not tied together, even if they're close together, but they're not tied together, you cannot. Well, of course, if they're tied together, that you can carry from one to the other. So, as it's clear from the Rishonim, where the assumption at this point is right now that we're talking where the ships belong to one person. They both belong to the same person. So therefore, it's a question of carrying from one to the other. They're both his Rishus HaYachid. You're carrying from Rishus HaYachid to another person's own Rishus HaYachid. Of course, you're allowed to carry from one to the other. Pshita, what's the shaila over here? Now, Taisa speaks out that if they're not tied together, so the Isser is that if they're not tied together, they were afraid that the chayfetz might fall into the space between them, because it might fall into the water, and then he'll come and he'll be carrying from the Carmelists to Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, we have a reason to be geyser. And even though in a case, Taisa says that by 2 houses, that from one to the other, if they're the same owner, we're not geyser, but over here, since the ships, they move around, they're not stationary, they're not steady, there's more of a concern that it might fall into the water, and he might carry from a Carmel's Rishus HaYachid. So if it's not tied together, we understand why it's also a Gzeira that you might carry from the Carmel's Rishus HaYachid. But if they're tied together, and if they're the same ownership, Pshita, from the Gemara, what we're talking about over here is that between the 2 ships, there's a small ship that's between the 2. There's a small ship that's between the 2. You might think that that ship would slip away, and that might now move away from them. Then there'll be the space of the yam that's between the 2 ships. And if he throws from one to the other, he's metaltel from one to the other, he's passing over the airspace of the Carmelists, which would be awesome. So the chiddush is, even though there is a small ship between them, we're not concerned that the ship might slip away, and that he might be carrying over the airspace of the Carmelists. Fragt the Gemara, Omer le Rav Safa Moshe Shabbat Gomat. Is this a good teretz? Metal from Mizul Azutanan. It says that you can carry it from one to the other. It's mashma directly from one to the other, that there's nothing between them. It's not a question of carrying by way of a small boat that's between the 2 ships. It's mashma, you're carrying directly from one to the other. So that's not the pshat. Elamar Rav Safa le Nitzruch ela Arav latal to Mizul Azu. What we're talking about, the issues in Arab. The 2 ships belong to 2 different owners. And with the heter to carry from one to the other is al yadei and eruv. It's al yadei and eruv that you can be metaltel from one to the other. And it's coming to teach you, as Taisa speaks out, that there is an institution of a takon of eruv even by sfinas, even by boats. You might think that the whole takon of eruv is only by a chotzer, which is kavua. But by boats which are 90, which move around, there's no takon of eruv. So kamash malan, that if they're tied together, and therefore we're not concerned that he'll be carrying over it'll fall into the yam, and it'll carry from the yam. If they're tied together, he can carry from one to the other. And the chiddush is that in eruv chatzeres helps not only by chatzeres but by sfinas as well. Like we learned in the Brisa, sfinas kshuruzu bezu. If the ships are tied together, ma'arvin, you can make an eruv and metalvin zulazu. Nifskaku, but if they broke apart, they became separated. Nasru. If they were retied, bein shogigim, bein mezid, whether it was done b'shogig or b'mezid, whether it was done without realizing that there was an isr, or was mezid intentionally, bein anusim, or they were forced to do it, bein mutoyim, or whether they were masask, as Rashi says, they intended to tie 2 other things, and inadvertently they tied the 2 ships together. in any event, once they've been tied together, then then the Erev has been reinstated. The Erev now has been reinstated. Now, even though it's also to make an Erev to begin with on Shabbos, but this reinstates the Erev, and you can carry it from one to the other. So what it means over here is, in our context, we mean to say is that there can be an Erev Chatzeres between the two ships. If they're tied together, then we permit it with this, the Erev Chatzeres. V'chein machsela is if you have mats. Haprusa is if they're set up, then they make into separate compartments. You have the mats that now are made into, make the area into separate compartments. Ma'arvin metalton zulazu. You can make an Erev, if there are two different ownerships of the two different compartments, you can make an Erev Chatzeres between the two, and you can be metalton from one to the other. Nigalu, but if the mats got rolled up, now there's no separation between the areas. Nasru, so that now answers it nullifies and negates the Erev Chatzeres. Chazav and Ifrasu, but if they got put back into place, bein shagim, bein mezid, bein anus, and bein mutoim, chazav terrorism, then the Erev is reinstated. Shekol mechitza shenasa b'Shabbos. Now it's also to make a mechitza on Shabbos. It's also to do it because it's boina. But if it was after the fact, if it was done, whether it's bein b'shaygi, bein b'mezid, shmei mechitza, is considered a mechitza. So therefore, the Erev has been reinstated. Correct Gemara, how can you say that? Yinivam Rav Nachman Loishana Lizrei Aval Taltal also this that we say that the mechitza ishmei mechitza is considered a mechitza, it's considered rishus yochid. That's only lechumra. That's lizrei. If somebody threw from a rishus rabim. So if there was a rishus rabim, and now in a section of it you had these compartments that were made up. They had the machsolas, the mats that made compartments. They become a rishus yochid. If somebody throws from the Rishus Harabim to these areas, if these mats were done on Shabbos, whether it's Shagi or Mezeh, but Seif Kol Seif, after the fact, it is now a Rishus Hayach in Yisrael. But Lataltal, to say that we permit you to be Metaltal in the area, we say, no, it's also to do it. If this Mechitza was put up, the Isur, it is also to be Metaltal, to consider this to be a Rishus Hayach and to permit you to be Metaltal in this area. So, isn't that a stira to what we said before? More answers. Rav Nachman amazing itmar. What Rav Nachman said, Lo Yishon El Lizrei Aval Taltal, that it's not a stira to what we learned previously. It's not a stira to what we learned previously in the Brisa, because what Rav Nachman was referring to is only on the case of Mezid. In the case of Mezid, there we're saying that we will not permit the person to be metaltal in this area. But if it was done, put up on Shabbos, if it was not b'mezid, if it was shegeg, anusim, b'toyim, in those cases, seif kol seif, the mechitza is put up, it's considered rishus hayochin, and one could be metaltal in these areas. If it was done in b'mezid, there's a kanas. We give a kanas and we say you cannot be metaltal. But if it was done, not done b'mezid, then even to be metaltal, we consider rishus hayach, and even to be metaltal. There's some discussion in the Paiskim, and it's mashma from Rashi, that this knas only applies to the case of the machzolas, because in the case of machzolas, putting up these partitions is an isur deraisa, it's boina, which is an isur deraisa, and therefore b'mezid there's a knas. But in the case of the ships, even if it was done b'mezid, there is no Isser Deraisa involved over here. We're not talking about a Kesher Shel Kayama where it will be an Isser Deraisa. So therefore, even B'mezid, there would not be a Kanas and the Erev would be reinstated. But that is some discussion in the Paiskim if this Din B'mezid applies to Machsals and not to Sfinas, or to Sfinas as well. Itmar Amar Shmuel Lafil Kshuras B'chutas Harba. Shmuel says even if the ships are tied together with a chutas harba, like a lace that's used to tie together a drawstring that's tied together a cloak, it's also enough to have the ships to be considered that they're joined together, and the Erev Chatzeres it's mutter, it's matter with the Erev Chatzeres. What are the circumstances? If it's strong enough to hold the ships together, pshitol, of course, they're tied together. And if it's not, why should that be the case? If it's not strong enough to hold together, it's not considered tied together. No, really, it is strong enough. And the point is, it's Pasha, but really over here, he's just emphasizing the point over here, a different case where something is tied together, where there he said it referring to a different halacha, which we'll see momentarily, that there it's talking about where it's tied together very strongly with a metal chain, with an iron chain, to exclude, as opposed to that case where it's talking about an iron chain. This is even with a chutas harbal. But really, essentially, for this din itself, it's a davar pasha. But he wants lafukim in nafshe. We learned in the Mishnah, calls for davar hamida, maybe la tuma. When davar she'ein ma'amida, ein maybe la tuma. So the case is talking about if you have a boat, as Rashi speaks out, it's a boat that is makabel tuma. It's a small boat made out of wood, according to the shitas of makabel tuma, and one end of it has a chain, as a iron chain. One end of it is in an oil ames, and the other one is tied to the boat. And in the boat there are kelim. Now, the boat could be tomei. If the boat becomes tomei from the mez, and it is not tomei as considered to be a tomei from the mez directly. If the boat is only tomei from the chain, let's say, for instance, it was not a metal chain, it was not an iron chain. Let's say that it was a rope. Now, if the boat becomes tomei from the rope, and a mess is an avi avoisa tuma. What it touches is an avatuma. What it touches is a rishain. If the boat is only a rishain, it will not be matama the kalim that are in the boat. Kalim can only become tome from an avatuma. However, Shmuel says if the boat is tied with an iron chain, and that iron chain is in the oil of mace, there's a din of cherev harei kachalal. The cherev, the sword, the metal, has the same din as the mess. So the chain would have a din, just like the mess, of a nevi avoisa tuma. That would make the boat that it's touching, that tied to, come into contact with, it would make the boat an avatuma. And the kalim would be, therefore, tomei arishon tuma. If it was not tied with a metal, an iron chain, it was tied, let's say, with a rope, then in that case, the boat, the rope is not an avi avoisa tuma. The boat would not be an av, and therefore the kalim would be torn. So in that case, it says kasher b'davar mida. It's something that holds it securely, that anchors the boat, holds it securely. Maybe la tuma. Then it transfers the tuma, and the kalim in the boat become tomei b'davar she'ein mida. But if it's something that's not held securely, ein mavin la tuma. So how do we define davar mamida? That it's mamida that holds it securely. Where it's tied with an iron chain. Meaning davar mamida means something which is normally used to be mamided. The point is not whether it's secure or not secure. If it's metal, there's a din of charav halal. So if it's anchored and it's tied in with something that's normally used to anchor a metal chain, if that's what's in the other end in the oil of maize, then it brings tumah to the kela. Something that's not normally used to be mamida, something other than metal, it's not mamida tumah. So linyan tumahu dirsi b'chalal cherev arek halal. Legabe tumah, there's a specific din by metal. In order for it to be an avi avoisa tumah to have the same din as the mess, it has to be metal. Over there, legabe that din, Shmuel says that it has to be dafka barzel. So over there, arek halal in avalin Shabbos, legabe our din over here by tying the boats together. In our case, metal is not the criteria. Over here, as long as it can hold the boat securely in place, and we're not concerned that they'll break apart, and he'll come to carry it over the yam, and it might fall into the yam, he might carry it from the Carmelis to the boat of Rishus Yochid. In our case, as long as it's secure, whether it's metal or not metal is irrelevant. As long as it's secure, you can carry from one to the other. If it's not secure, you can't. So that's what Shmuel meant to say over here. Here, as opposed to the case by Tuma, where it's dafka metal, over here, it's afilu b'chutas sarbal.